The Lakers are, believe it or not, right where they want to be because we all know as players going into the All-Star break, I want to be playing well. And yes, they have 19 losses, but they're between 3 and 5.
They're in a dead heat with the Rockets right now.
That's my point. So they're playing well.
There was a time when NBA was just not a basketball league, it was a battlefield. Every night, the best players in the world walked onto the court knowing that they were going to be tested in the ways that had nothing to do with skill alone. The paint was a dangerous place, elbows were flying, bodies were hitting the floor hard, and the men who played in that era did not complain about it. They embraced it. People like Shaquille O'Neal, Michael Jordan, and the Kobe Bryant did not just play basketball, they dominated people. They made grown men nervous just by walking into the same building. There was a fear that followed real greatness around, and every player who stepped onto that court against them felt it deep in their chest. But slowly, the NBA started to change. The hard fouls disappeared, and the brutal defense was called away by new rules, and a new kind of superstar began to rise. One who was more focused on being loved than being feared. No one represented that shift more than LeBron James. And for years, the entire sports media pushed one single message that LeBron was not just great, he was the greatest of all time. They put his face on every magazine, called him the king, and compared him to Jordan in the same breath. Most people just accepted it. But Shaquille O'Neal never accepted it, and for the long time people thought Shaq was just bitter, but the truth was something much deeper. Shaq had watched LeBron for years, not what he saw bother him, not because of the rings or the stats, but because LeBron had every physical imaginable and still chose to be anything other than the most feared player on the floor. And to Shaq, that was almost unforgivable. Now, to really understand why Shaq lost his respect for LeBron, you have to understand what real greatness looked like back in that era. When Michael Jordan walked into an area, the energy in the building shifted. Players on the opposing team were not just preparing for a tough game, some of them were genuinely scared. There were actual stories of players pretending to be injured just to avoid guarding him. Jordan had not slept, he had a cigar in his hand, and he was already staring through your soul before the opening tip. That stare was not an act, it was real. It was the look of a man who had already decided what he was going to do to you and was waiting for the game to start. Kobe Bryant carried the same energy. The Mamba stare was something that grown professional athletes can talk about in interviews. Like it was a traumatic experience, you looked at Kobe before a game and he was already somewhere else mentally. Somewhere cold and focused, dangerous. But then people started watching LeBron pre-game routine, and what they saw was something completely different. LeBron was dancing, he was doing TikTok style warm-ups shirtless in front of the crowd, waving to fans, laughing with his teammates like they were a birthday party. And then he sat in front of a microphone after a game where his team was struggling in the standings and told the entire world with a smile on his face that he was, and these are the exact words, a goofy 41-year-old kid. Shaq heard that and could not believe what he was listening to. Because in the era that Shaq came from, you did not say something like that ever. The moment you call yourself goofy, the moment you started dancing before a game, the opposing team took that as a personal insult and came at you twice as hard. Old school legends used everything as fuel. If you danced, you were going to pay for it on the court. And this is exactly what Kevin Garnett confirmed when he opened up about the 2010 Celtics. KG sat down and admitted something that the media had tried to bury for years, that the Celtics simply did not fear LeBron. They did not lie awake at night worrying about them. They did not build their entire defensive game plan around stopping him the way teams had done with the Jordan Shaq. KG said it plainly. They did not think LeBron could beat all five of them by himself, and they were right. The Celtics broke in that series, and LeBron responded not by fighting back harder, but by disappearing. That moment told the old school legends everything they needed to know. Now, here's where the story takes a turn that most LeBron fans really do not want to talk about, because up until this point, you could argue that maybe LeBron just had a different personality. Maybe the dancing was harmless, maybe the self promotion was just the way the modern games work, but then came 2011 and everything changed. The Miami Heat that year were loaded. LeBron had teamed with up to Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in what was supposed to be unstoppable super team. The whole league had accepted that Miami was going to win the championship. LeBron was in the absolute prime of his career, young, powerful, and hungry. The Dallas Mavericks were standing across from them in the finals, and almost nobody gave Dallas a real chance. This was supposed to be the moment LeBron finally silenced every single critic who had ever doubted him. Instead, what happened next became one of the most talked about collapse in NBA Finals history. LeBron averaged just 17.8 points off in the entire series, number that a decent role player would have been embarrassed by, let alone the man the media had been calling the best player on the planet. And it was the way he disappeared when the game was on the line in Game 4 with the series hanging in the balance. LeBron played 45 full minutes and walked away with just 8 points. Going 3 for 11 from the field, role players like JJ Barea, a 5'10" backup point guard, were doing more damage than the so-called king. LeBron was averaging just 3 points per fourth quarter for the entire series, which meant that in the most important moments of the most important game, he was choosing not to take over. He was deferring, he was hiding, and everyone watching could see it. Even the media refused to say it out loud. But what made the whole thing even worse was what happened off the court. Before Game 5, LeBron and Dwayne Wade were caught on the camera in the hallway, laughing and fake coughing, mocking Derek Nowitzki, who was playing through a 1 or 2 degree fever. They thought it was funny, they thought it was clever, but Rick went out that night, dropped 29 points to lead Dallas to a 3-2 series lead, and then the Mavericks closed it out in a Game 6. Right there in Miami, in front of LeBron's home crowd, Rick was crying on the court. LeBron was standing there with nothing. That was the difference between a true competitor and a man who was more focused on the show than the game. The legends watched all of it, and not a single of them was surprised. And after everything that had happened, the dancing, the disappearing act in the finals, the team jumping, the self-coronation, you would think the LeBron would have let this game do the talking, but instead, what the world got was something that bothered the old school legends even more than any of the losses. In 2016, after the Cleveland Cavaliers came back from a 3-1 deficit against the Golden State Warriors to win the championship, LeBron looked directly into the camera and said it himself. He said that moment right there made him the greatest player of all time. He did not wait for the legend to weigh in. He did not let the game speak for itself. He simply decided in the moment that he was the GOAT and expected the whole world to agree. And when Shaq heard that, something inside him went completely cold, because in that era that Shaq, Jordan, and Kobe came from, you never crowned yourself. Not once. You made your opponents so exhausted, so beaten down, so completely destroyed by your greatness that they had no choice but to admit it themselves. That how was the title was earned. Michael Jordan never sat in the post-game press conference trying to convince reporters that he was the best. He went 6 for 6 in the NBA Finals and let the silence the losing locker room do all the talking. Kobe Bryant won 5 championships and never once pointed at himself and said he was the greatest. The real legends understood something that LeBron never quite grasped. The true greatness does not need a microphone. It leaves mark on the game that nobody can erase long after the press conference is over. And then came the part of the story that truly sealed it for the entire league. While Jordan and the Shaq were building legacies that stood completely on their own, LeBron was busy building something else, a Hollywood image, a celebrity brand, a media empire that was designed to protect him from every uncomfortable truth. Through his team and his business connections, LeBron had created a machine that controlled his narrative at all times. If he won, he was a genius. If he lost, the story immediately shifted to how he did not have enough help, or how the league was not fair to him, or how nobody appreciated what a 41-year-old man was doing just by showing up. Charles Barkley finally said that every legend had been thinking for years that if you dared to question LeBron, his camp treated you like you had committed a crime. Even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the man who all-time score record LeBron spent 23 seasons chasing, came out publicly and said that LeBron's behavior became embarrassing. When the man whose record you broke tell you that you are dropping the ball, there is really nothing left to argue about. And that is the real reason Shaq made his choice. When Shaq was recently asked the name his all-time starting five, he left LeBron off the list completely, choosing Jordan, Kobe, and even Steph Curry, the man the media the call king. Because to Shaq, the GOAT title was never about how many seasons you could survive or how many points you could stack up in the era where defense had been practically written out of the rulebook. It was about fear. It was about loyalty. It was about standing in the fire when everything was on the line and refused to move. LeBron had the body, the talent, and every possible advances to modern game could offer him. But when what never had, what he could never buy, never market, never manufacture was the one thing that separated the legend from the everyone else. And every single person who ever watched this game with honest eyes already knew exactly that thing was.